by Liz Mann and Liesl Rowe from Leeds Beckett University.
Okay, can everyone see that? Is that good?
We can.
Brilliant. Hi folks. I am Liesl, and myself and Liz will give you a bit of a rundown. This is sort of in part projects that we have been working on as part of our respective disciplines. So I am the copyright lead at Leeds Beckett, and a lot of my work around AI has concerned the copyright implications. Meanwhile, Liz has been working quite extensively with the website. So this is sort of the findings of our own projects, and hopefully giving you some tools to best use AI moving forward. I'm going to bounce over to Liz, who is going to sort of begin our presentation, and then I'll have the sort of cautionary tale side of AI at the end.
Thanks, Liesl. Great. So if you want to go into the next slide for me, please.
A second. There we go.
Perfect, thank you. So what is generative AI? So you might think of systems like ChatGPT that you've all probably heard about in both your professional and personal lives. And these type of chatbots are often referred to as large language models. And this just means that they are fed large quantities of data, which they'll then use to create links to form greater comprehension. And that's with the aim of being able to understand and respond to user questions and instructions. Next slide, please. So as for prompts, we'd just like to take a moment for you to pop in the chat any keywords or phrases that come to mind when you think of generative AI, and in particular prompt engineering. So where would you start if you were going to enter prompts into a chatbot? What would be the first thing that you'd do? And then we'll ask you to revisit your answers towards the end of the presentation, sort of as a way of reflecting on this. So I'll just give everyone a minute to pop those in the Teams chat, and I'll have a look over them. Great, so these are already really interesting. So I'll just read out a couple. They're coming through. It's great that people are so specific already. So using action words, asking it to describe, summarize, explain, really thinking about what you want it to do, giving it context, being as specific as you can, precise, giving it a role, expertise level, tone, actions and tone, genre, it's very interesting. And then other people said things like small talk, chatting about the weather. Excellent. Yeah, being as clear as possible. Fantastic. Next slide, please, Liesl. So the use of generative AI is an ongoing experiment here for us at Leeds Beckett University. My research has found that honing your prompt helps to shape the end result. In other words, refining the input will get you closer to a refined output. And this is something that we'll need to continue to do institutionally, and it's a learning process that requires continuous investigation as well as collaboration. Research and training are crucial for us to stay on top of developments in AI, since these models are changing all the time. ChatGPT, as we know, has various versions and will continue to update for the foreseeable future. We also have Claude, Gemini, Amazon's upcoming project Olympus, to name a few, Copilot, which is the integration between generative AI and Microsoft, and that's constantly being trained and thus evolving. As Florida State University puts it, you might ask a question today and get a slightly different answer than the previous day. And so this should encourage us to experiment whilst remaining vigilant of the potential for made up, or what we call hallucinated information, among other discrepancies. Next slide, please. So, where did our creative journey begin at Leeds Beckett? I was first inspired by the University of Salford, who used generative AI to summarise the content on their careers website. They managed to reduce pages of text that were originally around 1,700 words to between 300 and 400 words. I wanted to see if we could apply a similar approach to a sample web page from our library website. The web page that I used was called Critical Thinking, and this can be found on the Skills and Subject Support page on the LBU Library website. The page totaled at 948 words, not including widgets at the bottom of the page. The next step was to choose two AI platforms to test, which were ChatGPT and Claude, with ChatGPT as the central focus. I did want to trial Claude, though, for a couple of prompts, just so that we had a comparison for ChatGPT. After creating my own prompts, testing a combination of conversational and formal styles, I then implemented Dave Burs's Create framework with the aim of producing copy that would match the tone and specificity of the original web page, whilst reducing its overall word count. Next slide, please. Great, so here you can see the acronym broken down. The most notable stages, I'd say, are character, which involves assigning the AI a voice or a role, as someone mentioned in the chat. For example, you are a professional copywriter with 20 years of experience. You should also feel comfortable adjusting your prompt if you're not happy with the outcome. For most chatbots, you're not limited to the amount of prompts you could enter, which is great. I'd say the extras are also really important. Once you've entered a prompt and the AI has produced the output, that's not the end of the story. You can always ask it questions or add more information. For instance, asking it, what did you understand from my question? Or specifying the AI to not make anything up. Next slide, please. So my main findings were that both the AI platforms responded more efficiently to prompts where each separate instruction had its own individual sentence. ChatGPT was extremely responsive to instructions when the create method was implemented, using and then removing subheads upon my instruction. There was no hallucinated information that I could see. However, ChatGPT did leave out some of the links that were featured on the original web page. ChatGPT produced engaging and emotive text in comparison to Claude, which focused on a more factual response, and this might be because its primary use is for legal writing. However, this did lead to further adjustments to ChatGPT's responses in some cases, particularly in one instance where the AI used quite aggressive weapon-centric language. After employing the create method, tone did become less of an issue, as the AI was adopting the voice that I had assigned to it. After Claude produced a spelling error in one of its responses, I then moved on to focus solely on ChatGPT. As previously mentioned, utilising the create method made things much easier. However, I soon realised that working to a specific word count can be tricky with ChatGPT. My language in the first instance may have been a bit too vague, instructing the AI to write 500 words or less. It seemed that giving it the option of or resulted in a 700 plus word count, but when I changed this to write it in 500 words, the result was 531 words, which still slightly exceeds the limit, but was much more accurate than the first attempt. Next slide, please, Liesl. Great. So going forward, I'd say that time needs to be taken to check not just the accuracy of the information that's produced, but also the tone and language selection of the AI. Subjectivity also plays a role when human reviews take place, so we need to bear in mind that tasks may take longer if a user is unhappy with their results, whereas others may complete tasks more quickly if they accept the output. With the evolving nature of technology, there are not only different versions of these chatbots in terms of the updates, but also access will vary for those behind paywalls or subscriptions. For instance, the research that I undertook was carried out using ChatGPT 3.5, but using version 4 or higher would have resulted in a different outcome. Something that's equally important, which my colleague Liesl will cover shortly, are the ethical implications that come with entering data into these systems. So being mindful of copyright and making sure you're not sharing sensitive data is also key. Next slide, please. So most recently, I've also experimented with image generation, which has proved more challenging than text due to most of the advanced features existing behind a paywall. After looking into DALL-E and Midjourney, two popular image generators, I settled on Adobe Firefly, since this software is currently free, with each action deducting a single credit from a total of 25 credits per month. One major benefit of using Firefly is that the image database that's used to train it consists of stock images that are owned by Adobe, as well as images that are no longer under copyright, i.e. those that are now in the public domain. Although this prevents users from creating images in the style of a particular artist, it does mean that the result will have less ethical implications. I started this experiment by entering my own prompts, just like I did with ChatGPT, with the aim of producing some images of a modern university library space that could be used as website decoration or in some other form should the need arise. From some research into Midjourney, I knew going into this stage that image generation requires more descriptive prompts and text. The more detailed, the better. So for my first output, I used the default aspect ratio, which is 1.1. And as you can see from this image set at the top of the screen, the result was a very traditional looking library with lots of books, but very little technology. For the second prompt, I added more descriptive words, specifying the objects that I'd like to see, such as laptops. I also changed the aspect ratio to widescreen, which allows more objects to be visible. And the result was a little bit better with a more modern look. But as a final step, I wanted to see if we could add a hint of LBU purple. Next slide, please. Great. So for my third attempt, I used ChatGPT, turning it into the prompt engineer. My instructions were, please come up with a list of prompts to feed Adobe Firefly in order to generate photorealistic images of the inside of a university library with laptops, PCs, and books. The colour scheme should include purple, to which ChatGPT produced a list of potential prompts. I entered several of these into Firefly until I was happy with the result. And as you can see, the first prompt resulted in an interesting design. However, the purple was a bit too vivid. And finally, after tweaking the prompt by adding soft hints of purple as my descriptor, Firefly produced this image. And this image has all the aspects I was looking for. A library, it's modern with laptops, and just the hint of what we'd say is LBU purple. So circling back to the start of this presentation, we would encourage users to test out some of the things that they've learned today regarding prompts, whilst keeping in mind the ethical implications that my colleague Liesl is about to cover. And the ideas that you sent us at the start of this session, if you just want to go back and have a look at those and consider whether you would go ahead with these or would you tweak your prompts along the way, and we can discuss this further in the Q&A.
Hi everyone. So as Liz has mentioned, there is obviously the ethical implications of using AI, and that's sort of my half of this presentation. So to come back to our initial definition of ChatGPT and generative AI, these platforms basically work by having a training set of data where large amounts of data are fed into the AI. They're not labeled, and it's just left there to process the information. It is trained to draw accurate conclusions by AI trainers who rate its response to questions. So the more a training set is used, and the more the AI gets a sense of what answers are useful, it becomes more accurate. The training set is used whenever a request is received by the AI to generate a relevant answer to their query. So the data within the training set sits there as part of the AI's structure until it's called upon to generate an answer to the request. Many AI providers will accordingly include in the terms and conditions that inputting content into the AI will become part of its training data. You might be starting to see the copyright issue here. So if there is copyrighted work as part of the AI training data, that could be considered a copy under copyright purposes. Originally, government advice seemed to suggest that AI fell under the text and data mining exemption, which would require a lot. It would allow you to have fair use of copyrighted content. There would be some access allowed. They've moved away from that stance in subsequent white papers. Now, instead of going a legislative approach, everything is much more defined by code of conduct and avoiding trying to make a legal decision so that they can be flexible and adjust to rapid AI developments. What that means is instead, the definition of what is fine with AI is being determined with various legal cases. So, to name a few, Meta versus Sarah Silverman and various authors, it's one to keep track of. The big one that I think is going to be quite influential is the New York Times versus OpenAI. Some AI companies are also responding to this by marketing themselves as having databases only built on copyrighted licensed material. So, for instance, we've been using Firefly because it's stock images. So we know from a copyright perspective, that's a lot more ethical. There's a lot of debate in copyright librarian circles, and no one really seems to have a definitive answer. But it's pretty safe to assume, I think, that putting copyrighted content into generative AI is a bit of a bad idea, especially if you're not the copyright holder. I would say the same applies to sensitive information and GDPR issues. Obviously, with all these questions of what is allowed to be stored in AI, that doesn't just apply to what's being fed into it, it applies to the output as well. You may have heard of the case of the selfie monkey depicted on screen. The wildlife photographer David Slater set up his camera in a group of monkeys so they might come and take selfies. He argued that due to his preparation, he owned the photo that you see on the screen. Wikimedia, however, argued that copyright is held by the creator, and a non-human creator can't hold copyright as they're not a legal person, making the image in the public domain. Legal experts in both the UK and USA ruled that he hadn't had quite enough involvement to claim copyright, and the US Copyright Office ruled that works made by a non-human are not copyrightable. Arguably, the same applies to AI. It's not a human, so it can't own copyright, and its works in the public domain. At the moment, UK government consultations seem to agree with maintaining this definition, but it's worth noting that not all countries do. For instance, India recently deemed an AI to be the co-creator of a piece of artwork inspired by Starry Night. But if the idea of AI ownership does come under review, more problems do present themselves. For instance, if I was to ask an AI to generate a landscape in the style of David Hockney, who owns that copyright? Is it the AI who produced the artwork? Is it myself who trained it into producing a result I was happy with? Would it be the company who produced the AI supplying the training set used to create the work? Or would it be David Hockney himself, whose work was the model for the piece? It's not really clear. And until we get some clarity, AI is going to keep being a copyright minefield. The good news is AI companies do seem to be aware of this major concern. When we were writing this talk, we were looking into image generation options, and obviously a lot of them are behind paywalls. So we were looking into if there were alternatives, and I asked Claude, an AI chatbot, for recommendations, getting the response you see on screen. We're still in the early stages there as well, but AI companies seem to be responding to the large amounts of legal cases and the legislation that's coming in. The UK might not have chosen to legislate, but the EU has drafted an AI Act that was approved by Parliament in March 2024, and the USA has also developed a model where AI companies need to declare to the Copyright Office any copyrighted material that their product contains. So what are companies doing about it? Aside from AI offered guidance like the one on the screen, there are three main measures moving forward. The first is ring-fencing content and secure data. Several AI companies have offered versions of their programs which don't harvest your inputs for training. Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT, to name two that let you opt out. New generative AI is also being developed that's built entirely on content that they've got copyright licensing for. None of those have really properly launched yet, so we don't have a sense of where they're at quality-wise, but that's definitely something I'm excited about. And finally, companies are increasingly making agreements with copyright holders for their content. Apple has licensed news content, and OpenAI have a deal with Axel Springer. It would be a way of avoiding the big court cases with large copyright holders, such as the NYT case. So it makes sense they're going that route in future. Now we've talked through all the problems of AI. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. So I think it's worth actually talking about what AI is good about and the limitations to be aware of. This section is based on the research of Matthias Dilling and Leah Owen from Swansea University, who have been doing some work reviewing AI in assessment with Bloom's taxonomy as a measure. They wanted to examine the effectiveness of AI and how it would impact on their students' assessment. So they wrote 20 questions and then generated 40 essays on ChatGPT with the prompt that you see on the screen. So the positives. AI was able to generate pretty good quality essays, mid-50s to low 60s grade-wise. Unlike humans, whose efficiency deteriorates the higher you go up Bloom's taxonomy, AI doesn't. If anything, it improves. However, it doesn't critically analyse enough to get higher grades and references a pretty small number of sources that it can misattribute. Around 35% of the essays feature misattribution or misidentification of authors' positions. It's also got a tendency to miss the point of questions at a higher level. Their overall conclusions were that AI is pretty good at classic essay prompts where students need to recap or use abstract concepts. It's quite good at analysing specific excerpts of text or producing scholarship that looks superficially convincing. But it's quite poor at case studies, information retrieval, and other empirical data-heavy type assessment types, and it's bad at critical assessment of wider readings or staking out strong conclusions. This is worth bearing in mind when we're considering where best to use AI and where not to. So what to do when using AI? As a user of AI, I would say we need to follow the questions I've put on the screen. Thinking about what AI software am I using? Who created it and what is the data set? What purpose am I using the AI for? And what happens to any information I input into the AI? Is that going to become a copyright or ethical problem? And have I cross-checked what I'm getting out of the AI to make sure it's accurate and reliable? We've written a paper version of this talk, which we've got on the Leeds Beckett repository. I've got a link there on the slides. I'm also just going to pop up the useful links of various content that we consulted in the course of this presentation. What we've actually done, because we thought it'd be a fun way of closing out this presentation, is we have got a little AI written song that I'm hoping plays just while you have a chance to put questions in the chat. So let's see if this works. I'm going to unshare and reshare my screen just to make sure I've got the sound working, just to give you a moment. There we go. Shut off. Then came a bride stealing what was mine with a click of the... Let's restart. Button is red like wildfire. Now my words in the hands of the soulless liar. I thought I had control, but I was wrong. Please say it's got my melody spinning round in a digital symphony. They say it's fair use, but it don't feel right. My creativity lost in the endless night. Oh, copyright, won't you set me free? There we go.
Thanks so much, Liesl and Liz, for a really interesting presentation there. Lots of people enjoying the song at the end. Someone saying